We actually want to get right to Kara Scannell. Kara, do we have a ruling in the Donald Trump civil fraud trial case?
Yeah, we do, Boris. We just got the ruling. It is 92 pages long, and I'm scanning through it right now. But when I'm looking at these numbers, the totals that the judge is ordering collectively in the case, so this will include all of the defendants, I'm getting a total of $362 million. And I'm just scrolling through this now. I can see that there's the dollar amount specific to Donald Trump. I'm going to use a calculator to do some rough math. It gets us to, for Donald Trump, about $354 million. That's for him, the company, the Trump organization. So very close to what the New York Attorney General's office was seeking of $370 million. There's a lot of zeros here and a lot of other numbers, but roughly $354 million is the judgment against Donald Trump.
Imagine a clock. It is counting down the seconds until a city sheriff walks into a bank and demands a check for nearly $500 million. This is not a movie plot. It is the legal reality currently facing the former president of the United States. Tonight, we go inside the high-stakes battle for the Trump Organization's empire. From the gold-plated hallways of Trump Tower to the rolling greens of Florida, the hunt for assets has begun.
As I speak, but a real significant win for the New York Attorney General and a loss for Donald Trump in this case that goes to the heart of his reputation, the reputation that he was a successful real estate businessman, that he rode to the White House. The judge finding here that there was fraud, there was liability, and saying that Trump needs to pay back more than $350 million. Boris, Brianna?
Yeah, it goes so much to his identity. This is clearly one of the cases, one of the legal issues that he's facing that bothers him the most here, as the Attorney General in New York had argued that it was the marketplace that was harmed here and was seeking to recoup this disgorgement or these ill-gotten gains. Let's go ahead and bring in Paula Reed, our chief legal correspondent, to talk about what she is seeing here, with our understanding here, Paula, that this is really kind of hot off the presses, this ruling.
The story of the Trump Organization has always been a story about numbers. It is a story about floors in a skyscraper, square footage in a penthouse, and the valuation of a brand name. For decades, those numbers were used to build a global image of immense wealth and success. But recently, a new set of numbers has taken center stage. The most important number is $454 million. That is the dollar amount, including interest, of the civil fraud judgment against Donald Trump in the state of New York. To understand how we got to this point, we have to look at the atmosphere in Lower Manhattan. New York Attorney General Letitia James has spent years investigating the financial practices of the Trump family. Her office alleged that for a decade, the defendants submitted blatantly false financial data to lenders and insurers. The goal, according to the court, was simple. They wanted to borrow more money at lower interest rates. By making the company look more valuable than it actually was, they saved millions of dollars in interest. Justice Arthur Engoron presided over the case. It was a bench trial, which means there was no jury. The judge alone decided the facts. In February 2024, he issued a massive 92-page ruling. He found that the fraud was persistent and repeated. He ordered Donald Trump and his companies to pay back what he called ill-gotten gains. This legal process is known as disgorgement. But a judgment is just a piece of paper until it is enforced. And that is where the story gets urgent. In New York State Court, there is no automatic stay of a judgment. This is different from federal court, where you usually get a 30-day grace period. In New York, a plaintiff can start collecting the moment the judgment is entered. Attorney General Letitia James made it very clear that she was prepared to act. She noted that she looks out of her office window at 40 Wall Street every single day. That building is one of the iconic properties that could be at risk. The process of seizing a building is not like a movie. A sheriff does not just show up and change the locks while tenants are inside. It is a slow and technical process, but it is a very real one. The Attorney General first needs to find where the money is. In this case, she already had a roadmap. The entire trial was about the banks and financial institutions that the Trump Organization uses. She could start by sending restraining notices. This is a legal document that tells a bank or a person that they cannot move or spend the debtor's money. If you violate it, you can be held in contempt of court. If the cash in the bank accounts is not enough, the state can go after the real estate. This starts by filing a judgment line. We saw this happen in Westchester County. The Attorney General's office filed judgments there, which is where properties like the Seven Springs Estate and the Trump National Golf Club are located. By filing these papers, the state puts a cloud on the title of the property. This means Trump cannot sell the land or borrow more money against it without addressing the debt to the state. The most dramatic option is the execution. The creditor delivers a document to a New York City sheriff or marshal. They also have to pay a $50 fee. Once the sheriff has that execution, they can literally walk into a bank and seize the funds. The bank then hands over a cashier's check for the amount owed. Under New York law, the former president would be allowed to keep exactly $3,000 in his account. Everything else goes to the state. There is also a cost to this enforcement called poundage. The sheriff is entitled to a 5% commission on whatever they collect. On a judgment of $454 million, that commission is massive. It would add millions more to the total amount Trump would have to pay. To stop this from happening, the defendant has to post an appellate bond. Think of this as a guarantee. It tells the court that the money is safe while the case is being appealed. If the defendant loses the appeal, the bond company pays the state immediately. But getting a bond for nearly $500 million turned out to be a practical impossibility, according to Trump's lawyers. They approached about 30 different bond companies. Most of them said no. The reason is that bond companies usually want cash or liquid securities as collateral. They do not want to take a building as collateral. Why? Because if the defendant defaults, the bond company has to sell the building to get their money back. In a slow real estate market, that is a huge risk they are not willing to take. For a few weeks, it looked like the state of New York might actually start seizing properties. But then the appeals court stepped in. They gave Trump a lifeline. They reduced the required bond from $454 million down to $175 million. They also gave him 10 extra days to find the money. This was a significant victory for the former president. It paused the asset seizures while the appeal moved forward. He eventually posted that $175 million bond. It was backed by a company called Knight Specialty Insurance. But even that was not simple. The Attorney General's office questioned if the company actually had the money to back the bond. They eventually reached an agreement with new restrictions to make sure the cash was really there and could not be used for anything else. While all of this was happening in the courtrooms, a different kind of battle was being fought in the world of public opinion and social media. Because this case involves a former president and a current candidate, it has been surrounded by a fog of misinformation. You may have seen dramatic videos on YouTube claiming that Wall Street has seized all of Trump's assets, or that banks are freezing his accounts in real time. Some of these reports claim that nationwide emergency freezes were issued on symbolic dates like January 6th. They suggest that $200 million has been snatched from liquid accounts and that the Secret Service is involved in security standoffs over real estate. It is important to be clear, based on the documented facts, these dramatic claims of real-time dismantled fortunes are not accurate. As of the current legal standing, the enforcement of the judgment is stayed. This means that because the $175 million bond was posted, the Attorney General cannot currently seize the buildings or freeze the bank accounts. The legal system moves slowly and methodically. It does not involve the sudden cinematic collapses shown in some viral videos. However, just because the assets haven't been seized yet doesn't mean the consequences aren't serious. The real story is found in the trial testimony and the judge's findings. This trial gave us a rare, unvarnished look at how the Trump Organization actually operated. One of the most striking pieces of evidence involved Donald Trump's own home, his triplex penthouse in Trump Tower. For years, his financial statements claimed the apartment was 30,000 square feet. It was valued at over $200 million based on that size. But the Attorney General proved it was actually only about 11,000 square feet. In court, it was revealed that Trump had actually signed a document back in 1994 that listed the correct, smaller size. Despite knowing the real size, the company continued to use the tripled number for years. The judge also looked at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Trump's financial statements valued the property as if it could be developed as a residential estate. He claimed it was worth between $426 million and $612 million. But the property has a deed restriction. In exchange for lower taxes, Trump agreed years ago that the property can only be used as a social club, not a private home. The local tax assessor in Palm Beach County valued it much lower, between $18 million and $27 million. The judge noted that the discrepancy between the club value and the residential value was an example of deceit. Then there were the golf courses. At Trump's course near Aberdeen, Scotland, the value was inflated based on the potential to build 2,500 luxury homes. but the Scottish officials had only approved fewer than 1,500 units. The valuation did not reflect the actual legal reality of what could be built there. Throughout the trial, we heard from the people who were in the room when these numbers were created. Michael Cohen, Trump's former personal attorney, testified that his boss would arbitrarily pick a net worth he wanted to reach. Cohen said he and former CFO Alan Weisselberg would then reverse engineer the statements to hit that target number. He described the process as similar to how a mob boss operates, telling people what he wants without explicitly saying the words. The Trump children also took the stand. Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump both downplayed their involvement in the financial statements. Donald Jr. testified that he relied on accountants for the veracity of the documents. Eric Trump initially said he was not really involved with appraising a Westchester property, but he was then shown emails that proved he was clearly involved. Ivanka Trump also testified, though she was no longer a defendant in the case. An appeals court had previously ruled that the claims against her were too old and fell outside the statute of limitations. On the stand, she frequently said she did not remember specific details about loan negotiations. The judge later called her memory suspect because she seemed to remember many details when questioned by her own family's lawyers, but very few when questioned by the state. The defense team argued that there was no victim in these transactions. They pointed out that the banks, like Deutsche Bank, were paid back in full and even made millions of dollars in interest. They argued that the banks are sophisticated institutions that do their own due diligence and do not just rely on a client's financial statement. But Judge Engoron rejected that argument. He ruled that fairness in the marketplace was the victim. He stated that when a borrower lies to get better rates, it hurts the integrity of the entire financial system. It gives the dishonest borrower an unfair advantage over honest businesses that tell the truth. He also noted that if the banks had known the truth about Trump's actual wealth, they might have charged higher interest rates or not issued the loans at all. The consequences of this ruling go beyond just the money. The judge also issued several injunctive penalties. He banned Donald Trump, Alan Weisselberg, and Jeffrey McConney from serving as an officer or director of any New York corporation for 3 years. Donald Jr. and Eric Trump received 2-year bans. Weisselberg and McConney were permanently banned from having any financial control in New York companies. Furthermore, the judge ordered that the Trump Organization must have an independent monitor. This is a retired judge, Barbara Jones, who oversees the company's financial reporting to make sure no more fraud occurs. He also ordered the installation of an independent director of compliance. For a moment, the judge even ordered the corporate death penalty. He ordered that the business licenses for many of Trump's LLCs be revoked and that the companies be dissolved. This would have effectively ended the Trump Organization's ability to do business in New York. However, an appeals court paused that part of the ruling. Later, Judge Engoron himself pulled back from dissolving the businesses, opting instead for the independent oversight mentioned earlier. As we look at the timeline, the story takes another turn in the summer of 2025. In August of that year, the New York Appellate Division issued a significant ruling. They upheld the finding that Donald Trump was liable for fraud. They agreed that he had misrepresented his assets, but they voided the massive $454 million penalty. The appellate judges wrote that while the oversight and business bans were well crafted to change the company's culture, the $500 million fine was excessive. They ruled that it violated the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits excessive fines. This was a massive relief for the Trump family, though the Attorney General's office announced they would appeal that decision to a higher court. This case has also sparked a wider political and legal fallout. During the second Trump presidency in 2025, the Department of Justice began investigating Attorney General Letitia James. They subpoenaed her office to see if her investigation had violated Donald Trump's civil rights. In October 2025, a grand jury actually indicted James on charges of bank fraud and mortgage fraud, alleging she had falsified paperwork for some of her own properties. James pleaded not guilty and called the charges a revenge effort by the president. A month later, a judge dismissed the case against her, ruling that the prosecutor who brought the charges had been unlawfully appointed. A grand jury later declined several more attempts to re-indict her. So, where does that leave us today? The Trump Organization still exists, but it is a changed company. It operates under the watchful eye of a court-appointed monitor. The iconic buildings still stand, though their true value is now a matter of public court record. The legal battle over the final dollar amount continues to move through the higher courts. The The story of this case is about more than just one man or one company. It is a case study in how the law handles the intersection of celebrity, wealth, and power. It shows the immense power of a state attorney general to use arcane statutes to investigate even the most powerful citizens. It also shows the power of the appellate system to provide a check on trial court rulings that it deems too harsh. For Donald Trump, his brand has always been his most valuable asset. He once testified that his net worth fluctuates based on his own feelings and his opinion of how his brand is doing. But in a courtroom, feelings and opinions are not enough. You need receipts, you need appraisals, you need accurate square footage. The trial revealed that for years, there was a significant gap between the Trump brand and the Trump balance sheet. The brand was built on being the biggest and the best, but the balance sheet was sometimes built on numbers that simply did not exist. Whether it was a tripled penthouse or a golf course valued on houses that were never approved, the court found a pattern of deceit rather than just a difference of opinion. The long-term impact on the New York real estate market is also a topic of debate. Some critics, like those on the Wall Street Journal editorial board, argued that the case was a political crusade that could scare away other businesses. They worried that if a prosecutor can use these laws to go after one businessman, they can go after anyone. On the other side, supporters of the judgment argue that it was a necessary step to clean up a Wild West atmosphere in the New York luxury real estate market. They say it sends a clear message that you cannot lie to banks to get a competitive advantage, regardless of how famous you are. They believe it protects the integrity of the financial system for everyone. As the appeals continue, the $175 million bond remains in place. The money is essentially sitting in a secure account waiting for a final answer from the highest courts in New York. The seizures are on hold, but the lien on the properties remains. The cloud on the title of properties like 40 Wall Street and Seven Springs is still there. This case reminds us that in the eyes of the law, every square foot matters, every disclaimer matters, and every signature on a financial statement carries a weight that can last for decades. The hunt for assets may be paused for now, but the underlying questions about wealth, honesty, and the rule of law are far from settled. We will continue to watch as the higher courts decide the final chapter of this long-form narrative. To understand this better, think of a massive ocean liner. It has spent years sailing on a reputation of being unsinkable and grand, but suddenly it has hit the rocky shores of the legal system. The ship is not underwater, but it is being inspected by the Coast Guard, and every inch of the hull is being measured against the original blueprints. The repair bill is being debated in the offices of the Admiralty Court, but the ship is no longer free to sail wherever it wants. It is anchored in a harbor of oversight, waiting to see if it will ever be allowed to return to the open sea. Throughout this entire process, Donald Trump has maintained that he has done nothing wrong. He has called the investigation a witch hunt and a political stunt. He has attacked the judge and the attorney general personally, both in the hallway of the courthouse and on social media. These attacks eventually led to a gag order. The judge first issued a limited gag order after Trump posted a disparaging photo of the judge's law clerk on Truth Social. The post included a false allegation about the clerk's personal life. The judge ordered the post deleted and told all parties not to speak publicly about his staff. Trump violated this order twice. The first time, he was fined $5,000 because the post remained on his campaign website for 17 days after he said he had removed it. The second time, he was fined $10,000 for comments he made to reporters that the judge determined were directed at the clerk. The gag order was later expanded to include Trump's lawyers after they also made disparaging remarks about the court staff. The judge noted that his office had received hundreds of threats since the trial began. This tension between the courtroom and the campaign trail was a constant theme of the trial. Trump often used his court appearances as a platform for his political message, telling reporters that the trial was interference in the 2024 election. The Attorney General's office, however, stayed focused on the documents. They showed how the presidential premium was considered. An employee testified that there were draft spreadsheets that proposed marking up the value of assets just because Trump was in the White House. While these specific premiums were not used in the final statements, they showed the mindset of a company trying to find any way possible to inflate its numbers. The trial also touched on the role of the accounting firm Mazars. For years, Mazars prepared the financial statements for the Trump Organization. But in February 2022, Mazars sent a letter saying they would no longer support a decade's worth of those statements. They said the statements should no longer be relied upon based on new information they had received from the Attorney General's investigation. Trump argued that the disclaimer at the beginning of those statements protected him. The disclaimer said that Mazars had not audited or reviewed the information and that the numbers might be way off. Trump famously told a reporter that these were worthless clauses that should have warned any bank to do their own work. But Judge Engoron disagreed. He ruled that a disclaimer does not give a person a license to lie. He found that the Trump Organization was responsible for providing accurate data to the accountants. If the data they provided was false, the disclaimer from the accountant did not shield the company from liability for fraud. The trial also revealed a lack of internal controls within the company. The court-appointed monitor, Barbara Jones, reported that the company's documents were often lacking in completeness and timeliness. She noted that there was no specific department in charge of making sure their financial reporting was accurate. In one instance, she pointed out that the company had transferred $40 million without notifying her, which was a violation of the court's oversight rules. As we wrap up this deep dive, it is clear that the New York civil fraud case is one of the most significant legal challenges the Trump empire has ever faced. It didn't just target his money, it targeted the very foundation of his public identity. It challenged the idea of the self-made billionaire by showing that much of that wealth was built on a series of exaggerations that a court of law determined to be fraudulent. The story is not over. With the August 2025 appellate ruling voiding the penalty but keeping the liability, both sides have reasons to keep fighting. The Attorney General wants the full $454 million back. The former president wants the entire judgment overturned. The independent monitor continues to sit in the Trump Organization's offices, checking the books every day. The iconic gold letters on Trump Tower are still there, but the shadow of this judgment hangs over them. The case has redefined what it means to be rich in the eyes of the New York legal system. It has shown that while you can build a brand on a feeling, you must build a business on facts. We will be here to cover every motion, every hearing, and every ruling as this narrative continues to unfold. In a world of political noise and social media rumors, we stay focused on the documented facts of the court records. Because in the end, the only numbers that truly matter are the ones that a judge is willing to sign into law. This case is a reminder that the wheels of justice turn slowly, but they are relentless. They do not care about presidential premiums or feelings about brand value. They care about the truth of the square footage and the reality of the deed restrictions. And for the Trump Organization, those truths have become the most expensive numbers they have ever encountered. Thank you for joining us for this special long-form report. We will continue to follow the hunt for assets and the battle for the Trump empire. Stay tuned as we keep our eyes on the clock and the courtroom dockets. The next chapter is just a filing away. As a final thought, consider the metaphor of a master weaver who has created a magnificent tapestry that the whole world has admired for years. But someone has started pulling on a single loose thread. As the thread is pulled, the patterns that once looked solid are starting to shift. The weaver insists the tapestry is still perfect, but the inspectors are now looking at the quality of the silk and the honesty of the dye. The tapestry is still on the wall, but everyone is now looking much closer at how it was actually made. The hunt for assets is the ultimate test of that tapestry's strength, and the world is watching to see if it holds together or if the whole thing will eventually come unraveled. We will be here to tell you exactly what happens, thread by thread and fact by fact. This is the reality of the law in the state of New York. This is the story of the $454 million judgment, and this is the ongoing saga of the Trump Organization's financial reckoning. Good night, and stay informed.